last two episodes on Mughal urban centers, we discussed the evolution of cities during the Mughal period. We discussed Agra, the capital city established by Babur and Humayun, then Fatehpur, established by Akbar, and finally we discussed Shahjahanabad or New Delhi, established by Shah Jahan. Today, let us look at the society and administration of the Mughal cities. The administration of the Mughal period differed from that of the Sultanate period in many respects. In fact, the Mughal administration took shape during the reign of Akbar. Neither Babur nor Humayun could give proper shape to any administrative framework. There are three aspects of Mughal administration.
The first is that the Mughals tried to introduce some kind of a uniform system of administration. The second is that there is a contradictory tendency along with that. That is, they tried to make compromise with the system in view of the local circumstances, local crises and local demands. And thirdly, or the most important one, that they had always divided the executive and the financial functions of the Mughal administration. In looking at these administration of the towns and the cities, as we have done earlier, we have to divide the cities and the towns by their function, by their population, by their size, and by other categories as well.
The Mughals tried to set up a centralized administration in places beyond the cities. In provincial towns, small urban centers, or market towns, the administrative setup often adopted local customs and conventions.
The provincial cities generally gradually grew, as we would see in case of Burhanpur a little bit later. Apart from the provincial cities, which are the provincial capitals or headquarters, there are the other towns or the cities which sometimes become very important because of their trade connections, because of their perhaps strategic connections, or because of many other factors. Surat, for example, was one of those because of its port. Cambay was one of those. In other areas also there are similar big cities. Sometimes these cities are bigger than the provincial cities, but politically less important. Economically perhaps was more important. Militarily it all depends. The third type of the city is a smaller city, and these are more in number obviously. All along the routes, coming up, sometimes declining, depending on the kind of trade, depending on the kind of commerce, depending on various other circumstances, including political casualties. The last one, the Qasbah or the marketing town, these grow simply because of the neighboring regional situations. That is, these are the towns where the villages combine to have some kind of trading centers, and these grow therefore because of a particular economic and often social or religious regions. Besides this, there are certain religious towns. For example, Gaya is one of those. In case of the Muslims, Ajmer is one of those. Mathura, for example, or Vrindavan for the Vaishnavites. So there are different kinds of cities, and one could say that in Mughal India, no city is similar to another except in certain broad features. These broad features one could see in the administrative measures that the Mughals had taken.
Different categories of employees were inducted to run the administration of Mughal urban centers. One of them was the Kotwal. He was at the top of the urban administration. His main responsibility was to maintain law and order. French traveller Thévenot has given a detailed account of the functions of a Kotwal who was in charge of the Surat city administration.
In Mughal period, we find that Kotwal becomes the head, often the executive head of towns which are not provincial headquarters. For example, in Surat, we have an excellent description of a mid-17th century French writer, Thévenot, who had given the description of the functions and duties of the Kotwal in detail in Surat. Now this appears to be similar to other Kotwals in other parts of India, in other towns as well. Now with the Kotwal, particularly in certain smaller towns, there was also the religious head, the Qazi. And the Qazi and the Kotwal, they are often not in good terms. We have an excellent example from the Navadvip area where Chaitanya had attacked the Qazi after giving due notice, but the Kotwal did not help him. Apart from the Kotwal and the Qazi, even in smaller towns, there is a kind of a population, one might say religious minded, or one might say educated, who were called Surfa, S-U-R-F-A. And these group of people, they are mostly against the administration and they mostly support the Qazi at the same time. So there is a kind of an internal contradiction even in a very small town in Mughal India. In bigger towns, these contradictions are obviously very, very clear.
The historiography of large cities within the Mughal Empire is sparse. However, foreign travelers like Thévenot, Nicolai Manucci, Ralph Fitch and François Barnier have written on the administration of Surat and Cambay, two of the port cities in Mughal era.
In case of Surat, the situation is simple. There was one who was called the Nawab, but he is not the provincial Subadar. He is sometimes the executive head. Under him was the administrator of the port called Shah Bandar, who looks after the port. And if there is a fort nearby, which Surat had, there is a Killadar, or the officer in charge of the fort itself. So in case of Surat, we have three principal officers. The Nawab, who is often called in the Mughal document as Mutsuddi. Then the Shah Bandar, looking after the port. And third, the Killadar, in charge of the fort of Surat. These three do not see eye to each other. Shah Bandar is technically under the Devani Suba and partly also under the Mutsuddi or the Nawab. Killadar is independent of both. When Shivaji attacked Surat in 1666, the Killadar did not come forward to help either the people of Surat or the Nawab of Surat. So therefore there is some kind of a contradiction within the official class of the even of the bigger cities like Surat. In case of Cambay, we have two principal officers. One is called the Mutsuddi, the Nawab, and the other is the Shahbandar. But in the documents, we also find another official who has probably come from the reign of Aurangzeb, but who was there in the early Mughal days as well, called Muhtasib. He is a man in charge of the morale of the public. That is, he is the man who looks after the weights and other prices of the market, looks after the walls of the city. Cambay had a very big wall, looks after the bridges, the roads, etc. He is also to find out whether the people were drinking, whether the drinks were manufactured or not. Only on one particular day, the Hindus were allowed to drink officially. Of course, they could drink otherwise, but it is the duty of the Muhtasib to see that such kind of drinking or gambling is not allowed. It's on the Diwali day that the drinking and the gambling is allowed for the Hindus.
All Mughal urban centers had some distinctive features. The customs, conventions, culture and festivals of one city differed from those of the other.
For example, in Surat, they had a tradition which one may call the coconut day. On a certain day, people come to the river Tapti, on which Surat stood, and throw coconuts on the rivers. This is a kind of a festival which first the Hindus did, then the Muslims followed. There were also others who naturally followed this. The Nawab used to come and see, watch this. In Murshidabad, we had the same thing, almost the same kind of a festival, which is called the Vela festival. That is a small boats made of wood or of paper. These were thrown on the river, and the Nawab used to come and see. So therefore, every Mughal city has its own peculiar tradition, its own peculiar function as well.
So far in this program, we have discussed the administration of Mughal urban centers. Let us now discuss their social structure. Abul Fazl, Akbar's court historian, composed the famous work Ain-e-Akbari. It gives us an insight into the affairs of the Mughal period, especially the social structure and the revenue system.
Every town has some villages attached to it. The revenue of the village, which is given in particular revenue units, these are attached to the town itself. That is, the income of the town depends to a certain extent on the income of the villages or from the income of the villages attached to it. Now, this peculiar feature we do not find in Sultanate period, but it is there in almost all the Mughal towns, and Abul Fazl has described this, giving very specific number of units or revenue units or mahal as they are called in case of each town.
Every city in the Mughal era performed a number of economic functions. The nature of these functions depended on the location, area and population of the respective cities. However, not much research has been undertaken on this subject.
One could say that there is a direct linkage between the villages attached to it as well as between the hinterland, which is a very large one, to the town itself. In one document given by the British on the history of Cambay, written around 1753, the British official said that the hinterland of Cambay at one point of time extended up to Delhi and Agra. But this has declined nowadays. At that time, the income of the Cambay port was 10 lakh rupees. Now it has only 4 lakh rupees. So therefore, the function, the economy of the town depends to a great extent on the region as well as on the hinterland as well. Now, as a result of this, what happens is that the village send the products into the town, provisions of food, crafts, etc. These are all taxed, and these are then sold inside the city. It is because of this that Professor Irfan Habib has classified the Mughal town as a parasite towns. One cannot accept it wholly, because villages are also getting certain things in return. For example, apart from the security that the towns give to the village, apart from that, the villagers get their money back to a certain extent, which are of course taxed again as revenue, money back to a certain extent from the products they sold to the cities.
Vast rural tracts surrounded all the large cities in the Mughal period. People from these habitats commuted daily to the urban centers for livelihood and went back home at the end of the day. Thus, the rural and the urban areas remained connected economically, and consequently, rural areas surrounding Agra, Fatehpur, Delhi, Surat and Cambay turned into suburbs or satellite towns.
This kind of economic linkages constitute the composition of the population within the town itself. In big towns, we have the nobles residing in very big buildings. We have a large number of their servants and slaves, as well as their under officials. Then we have also at the same time other kinds of people, the Beparis, the merchants, smaller merchants. Then we have a large number of floating population, artisans, etc., who come and go and reside. And in case of towns of Gujarat, the visiting European travelers had said that there were a large number of beggars who are very angry people. If you do not give alms to them, they may even attack you. Then there were the other kinds of people like astrologers, physicians, etc.
Many foreign travelers have mentioned the port city of Surat in their accounts. Its society had a mixture of small, medium and big traders. Many of them were very powerful economically, but they did not have any influence on the Mughal polity.
For example, in Surat, we have very big but small sheep-owning merchants like Birzi Vora, who had more than 20 ships. Then we have smaller merchants who had 1 or 2 ships. Then we have merchants who do not have ships at all. Then we have what is known as the dalal, the middleman. Then we have the purchasers who purchase the stock of the ships that come. Then we have the saraf, the money exchanger. Most important one, most of them are Hindus, but they do not have political power. Excepting Jagat Seth of Murshidabad, who wielded political power, although for a very brief period of nearly 15 years. So therefore the towns had a different kind of people in different areas.
The absence of reliable data about the ordinary people makes it difficult to form any idea about the quality of life. The French traveller Barnier has accounted for only two social strata in the Mughal period, namely the rich and the poor. But subsequent research has shown this observation to be erroneous.
This statement has been contested, as it has been shown that a large number of middle-class people were there, including astrologers, teachers, physicians, smaller officials, smaller bureaucrats, smaller merchants, etc. Another controversy has come, which has been started by Irfan Habib. He said that the decline of the urban areas in Mughal India, particularly from the second half of the 18th century, was mostly due to the British aggression, because it was the English East India Company who engrossed the trade, who took away the livelihood of the artisans, and it is because of this that the towns declined. But this has been contested by a Cambridge professor called C.A. Bailey, who had tried to show that it is true that in the 18th century, second half of the 18th century, many old areas of urban areas had declined. But it is also true at the same time that many new areas, many new urban areas with markets were coming up with different kind of people. So therefore one could not say that the decline was there in all cases and the decline was there only due to the British aggression. Whatever be the case, the fact remains that the study of the urban history is a fascinating one, which unfortunately, as I have said earlier, the Indian historians had not taken up in right earnest.
We should not hesitate to term the Mughal period as a golden age of urban culture. Evolution of cities across the country can be attributed to the political stability as well as the establishment of a homogeneous administrative pattern in that era. This contributed to an increase in agricultural production and spread of urbanization. In the 17th century, the Mughal urban centers developed so much that these could be compared favorably with the contemporary European cities. However, they lapsed into degeneration with the advent of alien pre-colonial forces and the resulting political crisis within the empire. But that is a different story altogether. Could give proper shape to any administrative framework. There are three aspects of Mughal administration.
The first is that the Mughals tried to introduce some kind of a uniform system of administration. The second is that there is a contradictory tendency along with that. That is, they tried to make compromise with the system in view of the local circumstances, local crises and local demands. And thirdly, or the most important one, that they had always divided the executive and the financial functions of the Mughal administration. In looking at these administration of the towns and the cities, as we have done earlier, we have to divide the cities and the towns by their function, by their
In the last two episodes on Mughal urban centers, we discussed the evolution of cities during the Mughal period. We discussed Agra, the capital city established by Babur and Humayun, then Fatehpur, established by Akbar, and finally we discussed Shahjahanabad or New Delhi, established by Shah Jahan. Today, let us look at the society and administration of the Mughal cities. The administration of the Mughal period differed from that of the Sultanate period in many respects. In fact, the Mughal administration took shape during the reign of Akbar. Neither Babur nor Humayun